Today we delve into the shocking and heartbreaking story of Cecilia Haddad, a kind-hearted woman whose compassion led to devastating consequences. Cecilia's tragic fate serves as a somber reminder of how kindness can sometimes have dire repercussions. On April 29, 2018, a man fishing on the Lane Cove River in Sydney, Australia, stumbled upon a horrifying sight, a body floating in the water. Police quickly arrived, recovering the lifeless body of a young woman, later identified as 38-year-old Cecilia Haddad. The investigation revealed she had been strangled, with clear defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Rocks were found in her pockets, suggesting an attempt to weigh her down. Cecilia was a successful professional, originally from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Known for her intelligence and generosity, she had moved to Australia for better opportunities, quickly establishing herself in her field. Despite her professional success, Cecilia's personal life was turbulent. Her relationship with Mario Marcelo Santoro, a man she had once loved, turned toxic. Mario, who moved to Australia to be with Cecilia, became controlling and abusive. After enduring his behavior for a year, Cecilia ended the relationship. However, Mario's obsession escalated, leading to stalking and intimidation. Despite warnings from friends and family, Cecilia chose not to involve the police, hoping Mario would leave her alone. On April 28, 2018, Mario lured Cecilia with a false promise of leaving the country. Instead, he attacked and strangled her. He disposed of her body in the river, attempting to cover up the crime by discarding her belongings and sending fake messages from her phone. Mario fled to Brazil, believing he had escaped justice. However, with the evidence gathered, an international manhunt ensued. Brazilian authorities arrested Mario in July 2018. Despite his shifting stories and attempts to manipulate investigators, the evidence painted a clear picture of premeditated murder. Cecilia Haddad's tragic story highlights the devastating consequences of abusive relationships and the importance of seeking help in dangerous situations. The tragic story of the Haight family in Enoch, Utah, is a harrowing example of unchecked domestic violence and systemic failure. Michael Haight, a seemingly devoted husband and father, hid a dark and abusive nature. Behind closed doors, his family endured years of terror, culminating in a brutal massacre on January 4, 2023. Michael and Tasha Haight met at Southern Utah University, bonding over their shared Christian values. They married in 2003 and quickly built a family in the close-knit community of Enoch. To outsiders, they appeared to be a picture-perfect family, but behind this facade was a nightmare. Michael controlled every aspect of Tasha's life, from her finances to her daily routines. Despite his financial success as an insurance salesman, he was miserly and manipulative, forcing Tasha to stretch a meager budget for their large family. His authoritarian grip extended to their children, especially targeting their eldest daughter, Macy. Macy, from a young age, faced severe physical abuse. Despite her courage in reporting her father's violence to authorities multiple times, the system repeatedly failed her. Police and child welfare services dismissed or downplayed her pleas, offering little to no protection. Even when Michael's abuse escalated to nearly strangling Macy, law enforcement issued only a warning without any real consequences. Tasha, recognizing the danger Michael posed, sought help from her church leaders and began planning an escape. She started saving money and initiated divorce proceedings. Her newfound independence, however, only fueled Michael's rage. By the end of 2022, Michael's life was unraveling. He lost his job due to fraud, and Tasha's decision to leave him shattered his carefully curated image of control and success. On the night of January 3, 2023, after a confrontation where Tasha made it clear their marriage was over, Michael spiraled into violence. In the early hours of January 4th, he shot each family member in their sleep before taking his own life. The brutal killings included multiple shots to their 7-year-old son Ammon, indicating a particularly violent animosity towards him. Following the massacre, the community and authorities exhibited a disturbing lack of accountability. Despite being aware of prior reports of abuse, law enforcement claimed ignorance of any recent developments, such as Tasha's attempts to file for divorce or obtain protection. The systemic failures that ignored Macy's reports of abuse ultimately left the family vulnerable to Michael's final act of violence. The tragedy of the Haight family is a grim reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse and the critical need for responsive and accountable systems to protect victims. Macy's bravery in seeking help was met with indifference, leaving her, along with her family, without justice or support. This CE, this case serves as a stark warning of the catastrophic consequences when cries for help are ignored. In the quiet neighborhood of Pinewood Heights, the air carried an eerie stillness, as though holding its breath. It was past midnight when a scream shattered the silence, a raw, guttural sound that jolted neighbors awake and sent birds fluttering from the old oak tree in the Morgan backyard. Inside the elegant Morgan household, a scene of unspeakable horror unfolded. Samuel Morgan, a well-respected architect and widower, lay lifeless in the center of his pristine living room. His body sprawled awkwardly across the hardwood floor, the cream-colored rug beneath him now soaked in crimson. A deep gash across his throat stood as a grim testament to the violence that had erupted. His face was frozen in a grimace of terror, eyes wide open, staring into the void. His arms bore fingernail scratches, his neck was bruised, and a deep cut on his palm suggested he had fought fiercely in his final moments. The once orderly room was now a scene of chaos. A shattered vase near the coffee table spread jagged fragments across the floor, reflecting the dim light like shards of ice. Samuel's favorite chair, where he often sketched designs or sipped evening scotch, was overturned, its cushion torn in what seemed like a desperate struggle. The wall clock had stopped at precisely 11:23 p.m., its glass cracked, and a single bloody fingerprint smeared across its face. The television flickered with static, casting an unsettling, ghostly glow over the disarray. At the doorway, Clara Morgan stood trembling. Her hands shook violently and her breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. She wore a loose white shirt, now splattered with her father's blood, and her bare feet slipped slightly on the slick floor. Her wide green eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of the horror before her. The man who had been her rock, now lying lifeless in a pool of his own blood. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible, breaking into a strangled sob. Her body shook as she clung to the doorframe for support, her mind reeling from the gruesome sight. The serene life they had built together seemed to crumble in an instant, replaced by a nightmare that she could scarcely comprehend. The first person on the scene was a neighbor drawn by the chilling scream. They found Clara in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes vacant, as though trapped in a daze. Paramedics and police arrived swiftly, but the scene was already beyond salvation. Samuel Morgan was pronounced dead at the scene, leaving behind a shattered daughter and a community plunged into shock. As investigators combed through the chaos, questions swirled around Clara's involvement. What had transpired in the hours leading up to this horrific event? The answers seemed to linger just out of reach, hidden beneath layers of secrets and a past that refused to stay buried. The picture-perfect facade of the Morgan household was now forever marred by the dark reality of what had occurred within its walls. Alice, the nosy widow from next door, burst into the Morgan home, her nightgown billowing as she followed Clara's sobs. The sight of Samuel's mutilated body stopped her cold. She screamed, her voice shrill with disbelief, and grabbed Clara's shoulders. "What happened, Clara?" I don't know," Clara stammered, her voice barely audible. Her usual piercing green eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the horror before her. As Clara dissolved into sobs, the police arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Detective Moran Cruz, known for her unrelenting drive, assessed the scene. A crime of passion, brutal and personal. The gash on Samuel's throat in the signs of a violent struggle suggested deep rage. The discarded, blood-smeared knife indicated intent and access. Clara, wrapped in a blanket, rocked on the couch, blood staining her arms. Her demeanor was off, and Moran couldn't shake the feeling Clara knew more than she let on. Clara claimed she was upstairs when the incident occurred, but her story wavered under Moran's probing gaze. Neighbors whispered about Samuel's temper and Clara's moods. Moran uncovered Samuel's emails to a mysterious M, a suspected affair, and financial records linking Samuel to Clara's biological father, Victor Hensley. The investigation revealed a tangled web of lies and hidden motives. Victor, embittered by a custody battle, denied involvement but admitted Samuel had threatened him. Margot, Samuel's colleague and former lover, was also a suspect, her alibi shaky and her connection to a sedative found in Samuel's system troubling. A crucial clue emerged, a hidden audio file. It captured a heated argument between Samuel and Clara, ending with a crash and Samuel's pained gasp. Confronted with the recording, Clara's calm facade crumbled. She confessed, her voice raw with rage and sorrow. "He lied to me my whole life," Clara spat. "He called me a mistake. I killed him. He deserved it." Moran watched as officers arrested Clara. The case was solved, but the tragedy remained. Clara, a broken soul consumed by betrayal, sat in the interrogation room, detached and unrepentant. Samuel's relatives, stunned by the revelations, mourned the man they thought they knew. His hidden struggles and choices unraveled a family's facade, leaving Moran to reflect on the cost of secrets and the fragile line between love and destruction. In the quiet town of Pinewood Heights, a tragic tale unraveled, leaving scars on all involved. Detective Marianne had cracked the case, but the price was steep. Samuel's life lost, and Clara's haunting presence a constant reminder. Despite years of experience, this case struck deeper than most, as Clara's story seemed intertwined with pain and neglect, culminating in a deadly outcome. On her final visit to the crime scene, the house had been restored to its pristine state, yet the eerie stillness hinted at the chaos that had once erupted. Marianne reflected on the devastating impact of hidden secrets, noting how they could fester and ultimately destroy lives. The tragic events began in August 2015, when emergency services received a frantic call from Tom Martin, reporting a violent incident involving his daughter and son-in-law, Jason Corbett. Arriving at the scene, responders found Jason brutally murdered, setting off an investigation into a seemingly idyllic family that hid dark undercurrents. Jason Corbett, a widower from Ireland, had lost his first wife, Meg, to a sudden respiratory attack. Left to raise two young children, Jason eventually hired Molly Martins as a nanny. Despite questionable claims on her resume and a concealed history of mental health struggles, Jason saw her as a beacon of hope for his grieving family. Their relationship grew, leading to marriage and a move to North Carolina. However, cracks began to appear as Molly's intense desire to adopt Jason's children clashed with his reluctance. The couple's arguments intensified, and Jason confided in friends about his unhappiness, contemplating a return to Ireland with his children. On August 2nd, 2015, Jason was found dead, bludgeoned by Molly and her father, Tom Martin. They claimed self-defense, alleging Jason attacked Molly during a heated argument. However, the evidence painted a different picture. Jason's injuries were severe, indicating excessive force, while Molly and Tom displayed no signs of physical struggle. The scene was meticulously cleaned, and suspicious delays in calling emergency services raised further questions. Molly alleged years of abuse, supported by recordings she claimed documented Jason's violence. However, the investigation found no corroborating evidence of abuse. The prosecution highlighted the inconsistencies in Molly and Tom's accounts, suggesting a premeditated act rather than self-defense. In court, the defense portrayed Jason as an abuser, while the prosecution depicted Molly as manipulative and deceitful. The case's complexities reflected the devastating impact of hidden truths and emotional turmoil, leaving a lasting impression on all who encountered the tragic story of the Corbett family. On July 10, 2001, the North Ryde Police Department in New South Wales, Australia, received a chilling distress call. A young man, Seth Gonzalez, screamed, "Someone shot my parents. They're bleeding." Police rushed to the scene to find a devastating sight. Teddy and Mary Gonzalez, along with their daughter Claudine, were dead. Seth, the sole survivor, was distraught. Initially, he claimed to have seen two figures fleeing the house, suggesting a racially motivated attack. But inconsistencies in his story soon emerged. The investigation revealed that the crime scene had been meticulously staged. The house appeared ransacked, but valuables remained untouched. Claudine and Mary were killed first, followed by Teddy. Strangely, Seth claimed to have performed CPR on Claudine, but forensic evidence contradicted this, as she had been dead for hours. Suspicion grew when Seth's behavior raised eyebrows. He quickly inquired about his inheritance and purchased a luxury car using government compensation funds. Further scrutiny of his actions revealed troubling evidence. A piece of clothing in his room bore traces of paint matching racist slurs written at the crime scene. Additionally, Seth had researched plant poisons and purchased toxic seeds, possibly linked to his mother's unexplained illness a week before the murders. Undercover officers befriended Seth, who unwittingly incriminated himself by sketching detailed crime scene maps and revealing knowledge only the killer would have. His alibi fell apart, and his fabricated stories were exposed, including a staged assault and false claims of cancer to scam relatives. The motive for these heinous acts stemmed from deep resentment. In 2004, Seth was convicted of the murders and sentenced to 3 life terms, plus additional time for threatening to contaminate food. His lies and manipulations had finally caught up with him, leaving him to spend the rest of his life in prison. The Gonzalez family home, marred by its tragic history, was sold at a significantly reduced value, closing a grim chapter in the neighborhood's history. On April 5, 2015, the small town of Leon, New South Wales, was shaken by the sudden disappearance of Stephanie Scott, a beloved teacher at Leon High School. The entire town gathered in grief, with over 1,000 people attending her funeral. Stephanie, only 26, had been an intelligent and vibrant woman who was eagerly preparing for her wedding. Her fiancé, Aaron, became increasingly worried when she failed to respond to messages and calls, leading him to report her missing. Stephanie had been at the school earlier that day, completing some final work for her students. The police investigation quickly revealed that she had deactivated and reactivated the school alarm system between 1:30 p.m. and 1:38 p.m., marking her last known actions. Despite extensive searches, there were few clues as to her whereabouts. Witnesses mentioned hearing strange sounds and seeing Stephanie's car, which later disappeared. A breakthrough came when investigators began to focus on Vincent Stanford, a 24-year-old school cleaner. Suspicious after an odd conversation with a co-worker and his unplanned visit to the school, police found evidence at his home linking him to the crime. They discovered keys belonging to Stephanie and several bloody panels in his car. When police examined his camera, they found chilling photos of a woman's body, which was later identified as Stephanie's. The discovery of more disturbing images and evidence on Vincent's phone led to his arrest for her murder. Vincent confessed to killing Stephanie, explaining that he had acted on violent urges. He described how he attacked Stephanie at the school, beat her, and ultimately strangled her before setting her body on fire in a remote national park. He also admitted to taking her jewelry and sending it to his brother Marcus, who was arrested for aiding in the cover-up by selling the stolen rings and destroying evidence. Stephanie's body was eventually discovered, confirming the brutal nature of her murder. Vincent Stanford was charged with murder, aggravated sexual violence, and other crimes. Marcus received a 15-month sentence for his role in the cover-up. Vincent was sentenced to life in prison, and his chilling history of violent behavior emerged, showing that he had been a threat for years, with a disturbing fascination with murder. The case left the town of Leon devastated, with Stephanie's family mourning the loss of a kind and promising woman. They also advocated for stronger background checks for school staff to prevent future tragedies. Despite the grief, Stephanie's legacy continues, remembered for her kindness and dedication to teaching. Christopher Vaugh's life appeared ideal, mirroring the American dream, a successful career, a loving wife, Kimberly, and 3 children. However, cracks began to show behind closed doors. Christopher's work frequently required travel, and during one trip, he began an affair with a woman named Jill, which lasted for a year. When Kimberly discovered the affair, it shattered their marriage. Though she tried to forgive him for the sake of their children, trust was forever damaged. Kimberly's health deteriorated from the emotional strain, suffering from anxiety, migraines, insomnia, and high blood pressure. Despite these challenges, she stayed active in her community, while Christopher remained reserved and introverted. On June 14, 2007, just before their 13th wedding anniversary, the Vaughn family set off for a trip to an amusement park in Springfield, Illinois. Hours into the drive, Christopher was found wandering along the highway, covered in blood, with a gunshot wound to his leg. He claimed he couldn't remember what happened, suggesting a sudden memory lapse. He said that Kimberly had asked him to pull over due to car sickness, and when he stepped out to check the roof rack, he heard a gunshot. When he regained consciousness, he found himself wounded, but had no recollection of the events leading to it. However, police discovered the bodies of Kimberly and the 3 children inside the SUV, all shot to death. Christopher became the prime suspect. His story shifted throughout interrogations, with his defense focusing on blaming Kimberly's mental health and medication. He even suggested that she might have killed the children before turning the gun on herself. However, investigators found inconsistencies in his account, such as the lack of Kimberly's fingerprints on the gun and evidence that Christopher had purchased a firearm shortly before the murders. As the investigation continued, more troubling details emerged. Christopher had recently taken out a life insurance policy on Kimberly for $1 million and had expressed dissatisfaction with his marriage, even discussing plans to escape into the wilderness. In the months leading up to the murders, Christopher had also been in relationships with other women and fantasized about leaving everything behind. During his trial in 2012, evidence against him mounted, including forensic findings that contradicted his version of events, such as bloodstains on his clothes and inconsistencies in the trajectory of the gunshot wounds. He was convicted of the murders and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his parents' ongoing support and claims of his innocence, the overwhelming evidence pointed to Christopher as the perpetrator. His case remains a haunting example of the potential darkness lurking behind seemingly perfect lives. James felt a tremor as he stood at the edge of his wedding, masking the gnawing dread buried beneath his charming exterior. His past, a secret marriage he'd buried years ago, had returned to haunt him. The wedding day had arrived at a grand estate on the outskirts of town, with everything he'd and Celia had dreamed of. The venue gleamed with marble fountains, chandeliers, and the scent of fresh flowers mingling with classical music. Despite the joy surrounding him, James couldn't shake the ominous feeling that his carefully constructed life was about to unravel. His past, which he'd worked hard to conceal, had manifested itself in the form of a woman he recognized, the ex-wife he'd left behind in silence. She stood in the corner of the hall, hidden in shadow, but her eyes locked onto James with a chilling intensity, as if she alone knew the truth everyone else was blind to. As the ceremony began, the tension in the air was palpable. The wedding took place under a bright sky, but dark clouds gathered, casting an eerie shadow over the celebration. Inside, guests whispered about the unspoken tension, while the final notes of the processional music played. Yet as James and Celia exited the hall, the sense of dread weighed heavily on him, a feeling that his past was on the verge of destroying everything he had built. Later, at the reception, the estate transformed into a picture of luxury. The lights twinkled, the string quartet played, and guests mingled in the opulent setting. But suddenly a scream shattered the evening's tranquility. Celia's mother had discovered something horrifying. Bloodstains smeared down the staircase, leading to a room where Celia's lifeless body lay, her wedding gown stained red. The scene was chaotic, signs of struggle everywhere. A single clue remained, a wedding band, abandoned on the floor, mocking the vows exchanged earlier that day. Amid the chaos, James was nowhere to be found. Guests frantically searched for him, but he had vanished without a trace. The estate, once full of elegance, had now become a scene of terror. Whispers filled the air, speaking of betrayal, vengeance, and dark secrets. When the police arrived, the investigation began, and Detective Elena Ruiz took charge. Her sharp intuition led her through the crime scene, where every detail seemed to tell a story. Celia's seemingly perfect life began to unravel as Elena discovered layers of hidden relationships and motives. As the investigation progressed, numerous suspects emerged. Philip, Celia's bitter brother; Daniel, James's loyal but resentful best friend; Monica, James's vengeful ex-wife; and even Emma, Celia's bridesmaid, who harbored her own jealousy. Each one had motives, but none seemed to have a clear link to the crime. A piece of text from Celia's phone hinted at a darker truth. "I know the truth. Tonight I'll end this." In the end, Elena found herself staring at the cracked mirror in the room where Celia's body had been discovered. The faint fingerprint smudges, now visible in the blood, suggested something crucial had been overlooked. A web of lies and hidden resentments was about to unravel, and Elena knew the truth was closer than ever. But the real culprit remained elusive. Detective Elena Ruiz's investigation had uncovered a chilling truth. James, desperate to protect his secrets, had murdered Celia to keep her from exposing him. The final clue, a torn scrap of paper with Celia's last words, revealed her intention to tell everything that night. In a tense confrontation, Elena confronted James, who broke down, confessing that he had begged Celia to stay silent. But when she refused, he took drastic action. He had not meant to kill her, but his desperation to preserve his perfect life had driven him to murder. As James was led away in handcuffs, his once cold demeanor dissolved into hollow resignation. His dreams of wealth and power crumbled, replaced by the weight of his crime. Meanwhile, Celia's family was left to grapple with the unbearable betrayal. The case had been solved, but the destruction it left in its wake was undeniable.